welcome to Mojo for the Modern Man. This is your host, Ken Mossman, and today I am delighted to be joined for part one of my two-part conversation with Christopher Maher. Now, Christopher is a former Navy SEAL. He is a brilliant man. He's an expert in the realm of somatics and healing the human body. And Act One is a story of him growing up, going to boarding school, making his way to and through and out of the Navy SEALs, and also a beautifully transparent, cautionary tale, I'm going to say, about one's relationship with the body. I'm not going to give away a whole lot of spoilers, but I will say that there's a lot that Christopher reveals here that busts any kind of delusions one might have about the assumed relationship between an elite athlete and their own physical being. Quick reminder, if you have not yet, please subscribe to Mojo for the Modern Man on your favorite podcasting service. And with that, let's go ahead and dive into this rich conversation with Christopher Maher. Enjoy. Christopher Maher, it is a pleasure to welcome you to Mojo for the Modern Man. So glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here too.
Yeah. What was it like growing up in your part of the world?
Oh, let's see. What was it like? Cold in the winter, super hot in the summer. When I was a kid, I was unaware of the outer world because I lived in a very curated boarding school, right? So everything was on a very specific timing. And if you were off that timing, you were punished in some way, right? So literally every single minute was accounted for. And I would say maybe a lot of anxiety around that because I have a different orientation to timing. And like, I'm not into a fixed set of timing. I'm into like showing up at the right moment. So if you and your wife were to offer me to come to your house to Thanksgiving, and you said, hey, we're going to start eating dinner at 7, I might show up at 7:06, right when you're sitting down, right? So boarding school was tough because I had to start at a very young age ignoring my own inner clock in order to produce a behavior that was acceptable to my house parents, my teachers, and it didn't work for me. It didn't work. And so I spent a lot of time frustrated and agitated. I did my best to be a good kid and to get along and get the rewards and the recognition that good kids get. But when I was ready to go and leave that place, I was ready to go.
And how old were you when you entered, and how old were you when you?
I was 7. I was 7, and I left at 17. So, and the other thing is, you go to boarding school at one point because there were dairy farms on the boarding school. We had to shovel the shit, and we had to bale the hay and stack the straw and paint the barn, and that's a lot involved. And so when other kids were out playing on their bikes and doing other things that little kids do, I was back there doing that stuff. And so I started to build a lot of resentment. And as you can imagine, I would go home from boarding school for vacation, summer, Christmas, Thanksgiving, and Easter, and my friends would be doing what normal kids do. And then in my mind, I would be going back to prison at the end of my vacation. And the lack of freedom to be, one, on my own timing, as I mentioned earlier, but the lack of freedom to be able to get into conversation around whether or not something was working or not working for me wasn't possible. It wasn't. I mean, and you're in a student home and there's 15 other boys and there's two house parents, a husband and a wife. There's not enough love to go around. There's a lot of rules and a lot of regulations, right? You got to have that in place because there's a lack of love. There's a lack of affection, right? And so at some point, when you're in school, you start counting down on the calendar, right, to the day you're going to leave. Much like you do your senior year in high school, but here you do it. You might start in 8th grade, and
that's a long countdown.
That's a long countdown, right?
Yeah,
and it just seemed unfair to me. I remember having a very complicated relationship with what you might call God or spirit, and informing that, look, I'm never going to do anything good for you. So don't ask me for anything. If this is like the shit story that you gave me, this is fucked up. And my resentment eventually turned into anger. And I was never someone who was going to take it out consciously on someone else. But I had some challenges in 9th and 10th grade emotionally. And as I started getting older in school, I started feeling feelings of anxiety, feelings of loneliness. I bit my nails. I wet the bed. I was a stammerer. I stuttered. And so it was a very difficult transition for me. And I was happy to go when it was over.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Christopher, because you didn't mention where you mentioned that you grew up in Philadelphia, and I'm curious, making that was it a year-round school situation, or did you get a full summer to be back home? And so that's one question, and the other question after that is, how was that transition from the really stringent rules, if you will, of school to what I assume was more freedom in the summers? How was that transition for you?
Yeah, the transition was difficult, and here's what I mean. My mom, even though she was a bit obsessive and compulsive, and she could flip from Godzilla to Tinkerbell in 0.2 seconds. She also was range. That's quite a range, right?
Yeah, that's quite a range.
And back to Tinkerbell. She was also very spacious, right? And so the transition there was tough because I was little and no one was really explaining to me what was going on. No one sat me down and said, hey, look, this is why you're in the school. This is what the school is about. And no one informed me. I just woke up one day and we're in my aunt's car with my grandmother. And I'm here to take, like an IQ test or something. And then they drive me over to this place called Kinderhaus. And there I am sitting with these house parents, and they're like, okay, let me show you your bedroom. And I'm not really computing what's happening. And then out of the left corner of my eye, I see my grandmother drive off. And then there was a big ache in my stomach. I can remember my heart dropping down, going, oh, okay. And I think at that point, once I transitioned out of that place, I was very ecstatic. Yet what happened is I didn't understand how the real world worked, because even though it was this perfect little microcosm where everyone pretty much did the right things and everyone got the same clothes and the same kinds of foods and everyone got a birthday card and everyone got a birthday cake and everyone got an allowance and everyone had the same kinds of chores. So it was very universal in its experience. And when I left and got out, I struggled because I struggled to pay bills. I struggled to be consistent, because now the thing that I hated most was the thing that I needed the most, which was to be able to lean on structure. And I was rebelling against any form of structure. So when I went to when I went to college, college for me was more of a social, emotional education than it was an actual, historical, scientific, mathematic education. And so I was going to class very little, but I was going to any event to socialize, to connect with others as often as possible.
And when did you start to recognize that the structure that you were rebelling against was actually what you needed?
I think as I got older, I looked back and I started to come up with this idea, because I would see other people's lives that went through similar things that I went through as a child. And I would go, thank God I went to Milton Hershey School. But when I was in there, it was the opposite. Like, oh my God, how soon can I get out of this place? And the older I got, the more respectful I became and the more grateful. And
for the experience that you had.
For the experience and the structure that they gave me, because eventually the things that you experience as a child, they eventually become you. Right. So as an adult, I have an intense work ethic, right? Much to the let's just say that all of my partners, right, in the past have been bothered by how much enjoyment I get out of work, because I took on a little bit of what I was taught at Milton Hershey School. So Milton Hershey School is a school in Hershey, Pennsylvania. So I was born in Philly, but basically I was raised in Hershey. And my mother's family is from the coal regions of Pennsylvania. And when I grew up with such difficult circumstances, it creates a lot of doubt in your mind and a lot of distrust. And it's a big journey to transition out of that, to turn into what the school was really all about in the first place. And what it was really all about was service. Mm-hmm. It was about honoring your word. It was about having an impeccable character. It was about dressing well. It was about being consistent. And I'm grateful now. Really, 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 really grateful. And my life is all about what Milton Hershey's life was about, which was about serving others who grew up in unfortunate circumstances. And now I help people transition through the stressors and the emotional and psychological distortions and the physical and emotional traumas that they went through in their childhood. And so now I've become the very thing that the school was all about.
So it sounds like the circle's been closed in a rather elegant way. And I know there's more to the story, and we'll dig more into the work piece of it in Act 2. Well, and I'm curious, Christopher, because you did go. Where did you end up going to college?
I went to Shippensburg University in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a state school. Pennsylvania, I think, has like 8 or 9 state schools. The biggest of them, of course, is Penn State. Mm-hmm. And the administrator sat me down, right? Maybe not the president, but maybe the guy below him. And he said, look, you had really strong entrance exam scores and your grades don't match your entrance exam scores. So maybe we're not challenging you. And he sat me down right before the semester was over, and I thought, F you, initially. And then on the walk back to the dorm, I thought, he's right. I'm not being challenged here. Maybe I need to find something different. And I packed up my car. I didn't even take my finals, and I left that day.
So you didn't announce to anyone you were leaving. You just packed the car and off you went.
Yeah, just packed the car and off I went. Sort of like, I think because I was like my grandmother in a sense that she picked me up, didn't explain anything to me, and she left. And I was much the same. So I went and decided I was going to open up my own business. And I floated around the town where my mom grew up, and I was social, and I drank, and I, smoked some hooch and dated and did all the things that I wasn't really allowed to do in boarding school. And a friend of mine approached me and said, "Hey, let's open up a sandwich shop next to the industrial park." And I thought, sure, let's go ahead. I had some resources. I had a lot of time, and we bought a bar, pulled out the bar, and turned it into a sandwich shop. And after about 5-6 months, I thought, yeah, this is boring. This can't be my life, right? Me making sandwiches all day. And I decided to sell him back the other half of the shop. And I was floating around, and one of my buddies' moms that I went to boarding school with showed up on my doorstep. She knocked on the door and she said, "Hey, why don't you grab your things? You're going to come live with me and my family." And I thought, what's she talking about? I mean, I'm going to come live with you and your family. And, when I looked in her eye, I had this guttural response. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to grab my things. Something's going to happen. I got in her car, and it happened to be my birthday. I was turning 20. And she took me back to her house. And eventually, I got access to a biannual magazine that was at her house about SEAL training and Navy SEALs. And on the cover was this 8 different boat crews of guys with a telephone pole on their shoulder running down the beach, grimacing, and white T-shirts and green khaki pants and black boots. And I looked at that and I thought, these people are going to challenge me. This is what I need. And what's that? 2.5, 3 months later, I was at the recruiter's office. And before I knew it, I was in boot camp. Before I knew it, I was at SEAL training. And, they delivered on their promise, which was the only easy day would be yesterday. And, I got down in the sand and put out 110% effort every day because that is what was required. Okay. There were no loose ends. There was no skimming. If you weren't putting out 110%, there was instructor staff everywhere. They were looking at you constantly all day long and reminding you that it's not about you, it's about the team. And so teamwork was an essential aspect of my growth through SEAL training and into the SEAL team.
So before you go too much further, pardon me for the noise here, how different was that or not than the boarding school? I know there's a physical aspect of it for sure. But in terms of the discipline, how different or not was it from the boarding school experience?
Very interesting, right? In a boarding school, there's 16 boys in a student home. In the SEAL team, there's 16 guys in a platoon, right? In my boarding school, there were 4 officers in every student home. In the SEAL teams, when you're in a platoon, there's also 4 officers, right? 2 high-ranking enlisted and 2 usually cadet graduates from one of the military institutions and schools. So there was a lot of similarities. The difference for me being in SEAL training is that in SEAL training, I volunteered. Right? I volunteered for imposed discipline. Boarding school, I didn't volunteer. I was put there. And, I really didn't understand anything about spirituality or a soul's journey at that time, right? So to me, it just seemed like someone shoved me somewhere that I didn't want to go. Yet boarding school prepared me to have a good time in SEAL training because it was quite like my experience in boarding school. You're eating the same time every day. You have to do things that you can't say no to. There's much that is required. You have to lean into a structure that is made up by someone else. You have to bend to someone else's idea and ideals. And so that was familiar. And eventually, as I was getting through boarding school, I understood that it was a game that I needed to learn how to play. And that frustration and agitation and pouting and being pissed off was only going to get me more of what I didn't want. And so since I already learned that lesson in boarding school, and in boarding school, your skin is thick because you're with 15 other kids that don't want to be there either. And so what are they going to do? They're going to talk a lot of trash, right? They're going to be inappropriate with their words. They're going to have unhealthy boundaries. And so when I went to SEAL training and in the SEAL teams, I'd already been prepared for that. So that stuff was easy. Right. The physical part, there were some difficulties there because I was super, super lean. And we spent a lot of time in really cold, dense water. And I ended up with a, full-blown hypothermia a bunch of times and in the hospital, with ventricular fibrillation. And that created some challenges that were physiological that I couldn't mentally overcome that, right? Right. My body's failing me. It's physiologically shutting down. Okay. But because of boarding school, I could always push the edge.
How, with that going on, how were you able to complete the training?
With that going on, well, they have winter classes, and they have summer classes. So when I ended up with full-blown hypothermia and getting rolled back, I rolled back eventually into a class that went through in the summertime. So the water was warmer.
Interesting.
Yeah. And, it's significant. It's, 8 degrees swing in water temperature over, 2-mile nautical swim or 5.5-mile nautical swim, which is about 7.2 miles. 8 degrees was in my favor.
Yeah.
Right. 8 degrees swing towards the cold was out of my favor. And, I suffered.
What, as you look at the lessons that stuck, because there's a big difference between I have an assumption here, and if it's inaccurate, by all means, Christopher, redirect. And my assumption is that the 20-year-old Christopher in SEAL training is very different than from the man you've become.
Sure.
Yeah. And so with that as context, what are the lessons or the perhaps even formative experiences that you see expressed in yourself, almost daily as a result of aside from the work ethic, and what are the other qualities that you think were really honed in you in the SEAL experience?
I'd say both boarding school and SEAL experience, this idea of brotherhood. So when I go places, I look at people that I respect and honor as brothers and sisters. And that idea of brotherhood and sisterhood has served me powerfully because I'm able to build rapport with other people and have powerful relationships filled with care and understanding and spaciousness. And, the brotherhood in boarding school and, the SEAL teams, it also came with some cutting statements and, poking each other continuously. which I've dropped that piece of it and to a more authentic space, which has more vulnerability in it. But at the same time, I'd say the brotherhood and the sisterhood, I see other humans as people on the same journey that I'm on. And I don't ever remember asking for help in the SEAL teams and not getting it from someone.
I want to underline that, because there's a way in which, well, I think I just wrote an article. I've written many articles about the illusion of this kind of a cultural illusion around independence, and do it on your own. And I didn't give any military examples, so they were in the back of my head. And so share a little bit, if you would, about. I'm gonna phrase it this way: the power of asking for help and being willing to receive it.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things. Like in the SEAL teams, it's things that are mechanical, right? And what I mean by that is, hey, can you help me lift this? Hey, can you help me go get that? Hey, can you help me with this? It's everything was external, right? Mm-hmm. But in terms of internal help, I never asked for that because of my childhood and being in boarding school and choosing the SEAL teams. I became emotionally self-reliant as an adult and still tend to lean a little bit more that way. And so that was a problem, because when you become emotionally self-reliant, you don't need other people to soothe whatever emotional state of struggle and strife that you're in. And so it keeps people from getting super, super, super close to you in an emotional way. And so in a certain way, it was to my detriment. And I wasn't able to identify that when I was very young. And so, people would say to me, oh, you're a bit like a lone wolf. And I think in the SEAL teams, in SEAL training, you have a lot of lone wolves. Even though we're part of the same pack, we're still lone wolves. And I'm grateful now that I'm at least aware of my tendency towards emotional self-reliance, because now I can have conversations with other people with things that I'm struggling with. Right? I can drop into a greater state of vulnerability around what I'm feeling, around what I'm thinking. And I can let people in on my inner ideas when I'm frustrated and agitated or irritated about how things are going, especially when they're going in a way that's different than how I had imagined. Mm-hmm. And so now there's more willingness to shed whatever's happening within a day or two versus maybe years later.
I hope you're enjoying the conversation. Pardon the intrusion. Quick reminder, if you have not yet, please subscribe to Mojo for the Modern Man on your favorite podcasting service. Let's get back into it with Christopher Maher. And there's something I'm noticing we're coming up to time, and I think we may be reaching a natural endpoint with what you just said, and maybe some ending this first half of our conversation with some advice, because I think particularly for men, there is this allergy, and the culture is not helpful with this, to seeking help or to seeking those connections, an overemphasis on emotional self-reliance, if you will. And so where would you point someone who's beginning to see that, wow, maybe waiting a year or 2 years or a decade or more to crack this particular shell is no longer a good idea? Where would you point them to start to open?
I think the thing that I would point them to is the mirror, right? I point them to the mirror, grab a chair, sit in front of the mirror, look deep into your eyes, and ask yourself some very basic questions, right? Are you okay being lonely? Because, I went to boarding school and I was surrounded by a ton of people. I went to SEAL teams. I was surrounded by a ton of people. I was an athlete. I was surrounded by a ton of people because I chose athletics as a way to express my desire to be challenged, right? But when you get towards the inner things, the things that bother you, the things that cause you to be overly stoic, you have to lean on someone you can trust first. And most people, most men, have been trained that sharing emotional information, discomfort, what makes your feelings feel hurt is a tenuous place to go because you could be made fun of, right? You could be rejected, you could be humiliated, and you could be disrespected. And I think it's important to establish that relationship with yourself first. And I'll go into a quick thing, and then I know we'll move on to the next thing. But I got a DUI when I was 27 years old, and I had to spend the night in a drunk tank. And I was sitting across from 5 guys that were in sombreros and big mustaches, and they were, older Mexican males around 55 years old. And I said, wow, look at these guys. I can't believe they're this age and they're in here. And I heard a little voice in the back of my head said, look, if you keep up this shit that you're doing, you'll be in here too. And that woke me up, right? And when I went home, instead of like taking all my stuff off and going up and going to bed, I opened the bathroom door and I stood in front of the mirror and I had a 2-hour conversation with myself. Like, what's going on? Why are you here? How the hell did you get here? How do you go from being a successful Navy SEAL, right, lining your life up to say what you want to do is make the Olympic trials, and here you're in a drunk tank? These things don't match. And I had a very vulnerable, open, sobering conversation. What it came to in the end is that I needed to investigate how I got from A to Z. So I called some family members and started asking some questions about our family history. And I came on to discover that I came from a family that has dealt with emotional self-reliance through the management of their stress loads in the experience of alcoholism. Right? And tools that numb and tools that numb you out. And so Stoicism was an easy place for me to lean on because that is what was in my field around me. And the thing that I think that's important for the listeners who are tuning in today is that if you're unwilling to have a conversation with yourself around your own set of inner deficiencies, and you can't admit to yourself your own level of imperfection, you're never going to be able to draw in anyone who can help you because you'll be too unwilling to bend the knee to say, hey, I'm in need of help. I'm in need of understanding. I'm in need of compassion. I'm in need of affection. I'm in need of care. I'm in need of love. I'm in need of acceptance and forgiveness. And if you can't get to one of those states of being, then you're going to continue to lean heavily on Stoicism and negative stress management tools. And negative stress management tools are like recreational drugs, alcohol, nicotine, caffeine, excessive exercise, narcissism,
porn,
dishonesty, excessive work. You're going to lean on those kinds of things to try to feel some level of intimacy. But the truth is, all those things are the exact opposite of intimacy, right? Nothing could be less intimate than focusing and working on your computer all day long.
Yeah, beautiful. A great wisdom there, and thank you for that. And we'll come back with a whole lot more in Act 2. Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me, Ken Mossman, your host here on Mojo for the Modern Man, and my guest, Christopher Maher, who will be back for Act 2 of our conversation, which picks up with a beautiful reflection on that moment that he ended Act One with, that moment of looking in the mirror, of following his experience in the drunk tank, as he described so beautifully and so transparently and vulnerably. You can check out Christopher's good work on his website. There are links to his book, his audiobook, and so much more. And those links are on the intro notes for today's show. Come by my website, kenmossman.com, see what I've got going on. You can subscribe to my weekly writings there, which I encourage you to do. Every episode of Mojo for the Modern Man may be found there as well. And go to the I Am page, the information on the I Am program. There are 2 cohorts of my I Am Men's program that will be launching in mid-September of 2023. Please reach out to me with any questions about that program that you might have. It is a good one, revolutionary, transformative, so much more. Quick shout out of thanks to my production team, Megan Johnson and Carly Farrar at Knack & Company. Megan is my assistant, keeps me moving in a good direction, and Carly is the copywriter here on Mojo for the Modern Man. And of course, Josh Hines, who does the sound editing and whose guitar you hear at the beginning and end of every episode. Couldn't do it without the 3 of them, so thank you so much. With that, be well, take care, make it a great day, and we'll see you back here soon on Mojo for the Modern Man. Hello and welcome to Mojo for the Modern Man. This is your host, Ken Mossman, and today I'm joined for Act 2 of my conversation with Christopher Maher. And Christopher Maher is a former Navy SEAL. He is the owner and operator of True Body Intelligence. Let's put it that way. He is True Body Intelligence. And we begin Act 2 with a deep dive into the moment in the mirror, the moment that lasted, by the way, for over 2 hours, the conversation that he had with himself in the mirror after spending the night in the drunk tank following a race that he ran in the Olympic trials. So if that doesn't pique your interest, you may want to make sure that you're actually awake as you're listening here. There is a lot to this conversation. We dip into the function of deluding oneself and moving past that, learning to face the truth, getting one's head out of the sand, and a whole lot more in this very, very rich, transparent and vulnerable and honest conversation between Christopher and myself. Quick reminder to subscribe to Mojo for the Modern Man on your favorite podcasting delivery service, and an invitation also to visit my website, kenmossman.com. And with that, let's dive into this amazing conversation with Christopher Maher. Enjoy. Christopher Maher, it is a delight to have you back for Act 2 of our conversation. So glad you're here.
Me too.
For many reasons, including those that the listeners aren't going to get to hear because of the conversation that you and I had. Well, just to be transparent with those listening, between the recording of Act 1 and Act 2, I had a low back injury and a head injury just a few days apart. And as soon as Christopher and I got on the line today, he intuited some of what was going on, and also the fact that I shared the story with him. So to make a long story short, he provided me with some true body intelligence, which is exactly what was needed.
You're good. You're good. I'd already complimented you on the fact that you were my favorite host. Okay. But now you took it up to another level.
Thanks. So let's dive in here. When we as we ended Act One, you shared the story of ending up in the drunk tank, and you had that realization there. You could see the train of the future, if you will, coming down the tracks, and there was. You mentioned going and having that 2-hour conversation in front of the mirror, which I thought, that's just brilliant. And what was it that, in your estimation or in your memory, what was it that gave you the wherewithal to actually have that transformative, in many ways, conversation?
I think because I was up all night in a drunk tank, I didn't get any sleep. And it might have been like 9 or 10 o'clock by the time I got home. And what I've noticed about myself is when I'm severely tired, I'm less defensive, meaning I'm less well defended. And I think being up the whole night, being in the drunk tank, being frustrated and agitated, looking at what some people might call spirit said to me, if you don't get your act together, you're going to end up like these other guys in the drunk tank. That woke me up. And when I was sitting there, I already was starting to look at myself. And again, I think being up have run a race the day before, being exhausted, being up all night, and not having my usual amount of energy, because myself, and I assume like a lot of other humans, when we have a lot of energy, it's easy for us to defend our position. And because I was so tired, I think it was very easy for me to surrender to what my soul wanted to have as an experience. And, I say this to people all the time. The universe is smarter than you. Okay. And it laid out the perfect strategy to get me absolutely exhausted. It got me to look at my beautifully curated image. And now I had to face the fact that I was in jail. It was smelly, it was cold, it was unforgiving. It was a stark contrast to to get me to take a deep look.
You use some language in there that I'd love for you to expound on. You said you were less defensive, and then you said less defended. So you used both words. And what really struck me is that, of course, oftentimes when we think of defensiveness, we think of it in relationship to other.
Yeah.
And I think you're bringing up something that's wildly important, and that is, looking at the ways in which we are actually defended against ourselves.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a few words on that.
It's one of the things that I've been learning over the last 2.5 decades is that the body has its own intelligence, which is why my business is called True Body Intelligence, right? It's about accessing the intelligence that's inherent in the body. And I think we might have gone over this earlier, I don't remember, but my skin was severely injured by a babysitter. And when you have injury to an organ, it puts you into the low function of that organ. And the skin is your first line of defense.
Mm-hmm.
But when the skin is injured, it causes you to be overly defensive or excessively defensive. Now, the left side of the body is you being too well defended against yourself. The right side of the body is holding position against others outside of you. And of the two hands, it was my left hand that was severely burned. And all the injury, the majority of the operations were happening on my left side. And so my body was matching up with the way that I was operating in life. And so that question, and that choice to take action to my own benefit and go have that 2-hour conversation in the mirror and get really honest, that was me surrendering, bending the knee to myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And my experience that day was satisfaction, because the moment I was willing to bend the knee to my own defenses that I was using against me, I was willing to be transparent with other people. And I called up all my friends and all my buddies that I used to get drunk or high with or silly with or wild with. And I said, look, if you're calling me because you want to get wild, you should lose my number. I'm going to be doing something different with my life. I didn't know what it was going to be. I just knew they needed to know that I'm going to put up a healthy boundary. And my boundary is, guess what? I'm no longer willing to participate in doing things that I know are harmful to myself.
That's such a huge step that you're describing, and one that I think many would consider "quote unquote" radical. On the one hand, on the other hand, there's a way in which if we really look, and I think this is is a really important step in terms of taking down one's defenses against oneself, or perhaps taking down the mechanisms of offensives against oneself. In this case, based on what you've said, it is the recognition and first the recognition and also the acceptance of, okay, there are actually relationships in my life that, on the surface they might be fun on the one hand, and there's, we could go all day about looking at some of the history of those relationships, where they're forged, et cetera, where they live in our hearts. And at the same time, there's this recognition that, that relationship or those relationships or the activities that we engage in when we're together just don't serve. They just don't serve. Yeah. So I think there's a question in there. I'm not sure what it is.
Well, the thing is they were in disservice to my goals, right? Because my goal was to get to the Olympic trials. Right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm leaving a race, and the race again was up at UCSD the night before I was in the drunk tank, why am I drinking alcohol? Why am I, right? Like this is incongruent. This doesn't match up. Like you're saying that this is your goal, and the actions that you're taking are actually in the opposite direction. They're going to interfere with your opportunity to experience what it is you want to achieve. And so there must be something going on inside of me that is delusional, right? And in order for me to have something that's going on that's delusional, I have to have something that I can't see. Well, guess what you can't see? You can't see truth when you're well defended against yourself. Because the defenses are so good, they're so sophisticated, right? That you can't even see that your head is in the sand. You're pretending that no, my head's out of the sand and I'm looking at the sky, I'm looking at the trees around me, I can see the lake. No, actually, you can't. And so what's the mechanism that's in the way for me being in reality? And I was too defended against myself.
Yeah. Oh, there is so much. There is so much in there. What Well, there's two directions I'm pulled to go in here, Christopher. So I'm going to ask you for guidance. I'm going to ask for your guidance on this one, because we could continue to look at defenses against one's self on the one hand. On the other hand, we can also move in the direction of your work. There's a way that they go hand in hand with one another. So let's start there. Well, let me share the assumption that popped in here is that that conversation in front of the mirror, the reaching out to the people that you were letting know, oh, if this is what we're about, then take me off of your contacts list. When did you realize that was clearly pointing you toward your life's work?
In retrospect, years, right?
Yeah.
Years down the road, all I knew in that moment is this, that the curtain had opened and I could see the shadow. And I no longer wanted to participate in it. And so I was able to take heartfelt action immediately. And then that gave me some space, because I gave those people the other option too. I said to them, listen, if you're calling me up because you want to barbecue, you want to watch a fight, you want to watch a football game, you need some help moving some heavy furniture in your house, I'm still here for you. Okay. I still have love for you. I'm choosing to no longer participate in those activities because now I'm clear that I have been overly well defended, so much so that I couldn't be in reality.
What kind of responses did you get?
I got zero responses. Nobody ever called me back.
Wow.
They disappeared. I think, one, they respected me enough to respect my position. And two, you're in your 20s. And so the friends that you have, they're fleeting. The relationships that you have, they're impermanent, right? Who at 27 is clear on what they really want to be doing with their life. And the only thing that I was really clear about at that time is I no longer could participate in something that I knew was harming.
Yeah. Brilliant. So what were the mile markers, the pivots, from that moment on that really pointed you toward where you have ended up at this point?
Yeah, I mean, what's very interesting, as soon as I put my flag in the sand, right? It's like the Europeans that would go, they'd go to like South America and the Portuguese are in Brazil and they're putting their flag in the sand. They're like, we own this place. And you're like, what are you talking about? You just put a flag in the sand. We've been living here for 5,000 years. So I was able to put my flag in the sand. And when I put my flag in the sand, more of the layers of stress and trauma that were always hiding underneath, they felt free to inform me that they were there. And the way that I experienced them as pain.
Physical pain, emotional pain, spiritual
pain, emotional pain, spiritual pain in the sense that my energy was inconsistent, emotional pain in the sense that I had increasing levels of anxiety, physical pain in the sense that I was getting soft tissue injuries and was under constant joint pain. And when I look back, I realize that when you're a child and you experience varying levels of trauma that are consistent, but also very loud and intense, you get into a state of emotional self-reliance. And I was stoic, right? On the outside, I was smiley and wonderful, but on the inside, I was excessively contained and overly controlled. I was never going to let you see the discomfort that I was in. I was never going to bitch. I was never going to moan. I was never going to complain, because the way that I was institutionalized as a child with the boarding school that I went to, Mount Hershey School in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and being in the military and going through SEAL training and being in the SEAL team, Stoicism was a natural state that not only myself, but the people that I was around were locked into as their survival-based strategy emotionally.
What had you recognize the messages in the pain?
The message for me in the pain, well, because I'm self-introspective, I got to see how I dealt with it initially. Initially, when I was in pain, I just kept doing what I was doing because that's how I was trained. And then eventually I got to the place where I could tell someone. And the person that I really let in to the amount of pain that I was in was someone who went through similar experiences and circumstances that I did, went through SEAL training, was in the SEAL teams, decided to get out and go back to school and further their universal education around life and their own individual pursuits. And this person helped me. They brought a yoga mat and a juicer over to my house.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned that in Act 1. Yeah, the yoga mat and the juicer, yeah.
And that was the moment, right? I had to bend the knee. You know, the marker was where the change was going to happen was, are you willing to bend the knee? Are you willing to say, hey, I'm fucked up. I'm a mess. Don't buy on the outside what I'm giving you. The inside is telling me the real story. And that helped me out.
Pardon the intrusion invitation. Come by my website, kenmossman.com, and have a look at the I Am program. It's my flagship men's program, and 2 cohorts launching this fall. Let's dive back into the conversation with Christopher Maher. So there's 2 really important pieces in what you just described there, Christopher. One of them is having the presence of mind to reach out and to ask for help.
Yeah.
The other one is to have the presence of mind, the humility, if you will, to and I'm gonna use this word as well, and the generosity of spirit to receive the help that you've asked for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a big step, I think, particularly for, I know it's a big step for everyone in our culture, but it's a particularly big step for men who, you know, who can really over-index on self-reliance to a fault. And I'm going to ask you to share some advice, if you will. You know, where would you point a man who is new at asking for help to, first of all, to ask, and second of all, to graciously and generously receive?
Yeah, I think the most important first step is to grab a chair and sit in front of a mirror. Right? Look into your own eyes. They always tell us the eyes are the windows to the soul. So imagine you have the soul's matrix, and then you have the negatively conditioned personality, right? So the negatively conditioned personality, should it go to the negatively conditioned personality for advice?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that advice is going to be fleeting and insufficient. Or should the negatively conditioned personality that's in that moment of recognizing that the strategies that they're using aren't bearing the fruit that they want to eat? Well, the obvious, most prudent choice would be to get a chair, get in front of a mirror, and look into your own eyes and ask some very basic questions, right? Ask your soul for guidance. Because a lot of people, they don't have anyone that they can really trust. Especially take a young man that grew up in a household with a father who was either stoic or stoic then abusive, right? Could be either verbally abusive, constantly picking at and emasculating. Could be physically abusive, could be emotionally abusive, goes passive aggressive, won't talk to his son for 2 or 3 days if the son makes a mistake, even though how's the son going to learn about life if he doesn't make mistakes, which makes no logical sense that you would ever punish anyone for making a mistake. But that's a different podcast.
Or not.
Or yeah, or not.
Or not.
But I think the most important thing to do is to get in front of a mirror and have a deep, soulful conversation. And then ask yourself, hey, what's going on? Why are we here? Who do I need to speak to? Who's the safest person for me? Somebody that I can trust emotionally, somebody who's a good listener, right? Rather than someone who will give you advice, maybe you need someone who will simply listen to you, right? And maybe it's a male, maybe it's a female, maybe it's an old college roommate, like whoever, maybe it's a therapist. Maybe you feel so unsafe that you can never reveal to anyone who's in your sphere of influence about what you're really going through. Then find a professional and sit down and just offload. That's the first step. Bend the knee and offload and simply say, look, I'm a mess. I'm overwhelmed and I need help. Would you be willing to listen to my story? And if I need advice afterwards, could you share some advice with me? I think that's the prudent first step.
There's a way that the culture encourages, not only encourages the stoicism and the self-reliance, the over-indexing on the self-reliance mentioned before, but also has a way of wrapping the notion that help is needed in shame. And then the experience, I see it time and time again in my own work. I imagine you see it as well. That there's the stories themselves, once they're told, oftentimes the shame simply, not always, by the way. I mean, we know this, not always, but oftentimes the telling the story is the first part of breaking up the blockage. The defensive armor that the shame keeps in place.
Yeah. It's like pulling a cork out of a champagne bottle. Right? And that's been the champagne bottle obviously has been shaken up by life.
Mm-hmm.
And you've had experiences that are beyond your capacity to process effectively. And so this information, this data, this experience is imprinted on your emotional body. And it's going to stay there until you bend the knee, you open your heart, and you get vulnerable and you ask for help. Emotional self-reliance was a great strategy for me as a 5-year-old kid. But then it became, my gift became my curse. Because now I'm a hyper-independent adult who operates like a lone wolf. And when I'm overwhelmed emotionally, I feel safer by attempting to process and soothe myself, process on my own, and keep moving forward, versus admitting that I'm overwhelmed, which would, in that admission, my inner child would go, hey, he's admitting he's overwhelmed. This is good for us.
Yeah.
I think I can trust him more.
Yeah.
And now I have the freedom to share what you pointed out would be guilt and or shame or confusion, right? Because I feel like men are under a lot of pressure to always have the right answer. And then if we don't, especially when we're younger, we're meant to feel stupid or inadequate. And then we have to bolster up our defenses. And I think as a man, for me personally, it's more important to find someone who I trust. And I have somebody in my life, which is great. I just call them. I go, "Hey, man, I have something to get off my chest. Can I share this with you?" And then you give me some feedback. And boom, whatever the guy's doing, drops it, gives me 5 or 10 minutes. And now I'm operating from clarity rather than from anger or anxiety or fear or a self-righteous position.
Yeah, beautifully said. And I want to underline what you just said there, Christopher, because it is like gold, and that is, again, from what I've seen and what I've experienced too, the hanging on to the thing that we know. I think when one gets to a certain point, it's like, oh, this is something for me to share, that I really need to share and get that kind of feedback from another human being. And you said, maybe 5-10 minutes. The important thing to know is that we can hang on for decades. Literally, we can hang on to those things for decades that take 5, 10, sometimes less. Sometimes a little bit more, but oftentimes a little bit less time to actually get through, if we've reached the point where we're willing to pick up the phone, jump on or sit down with someone and have that open-hearted conversation. Key thing that you mentioned a couple times is, I'm changing the language a little bit, but with someone who is a trusted agent.
Yes.
Someone who's a trusted agent.
Yeah, for sure. Because the more rapport that you have with this person, the more willing they are to share something with you that you may not want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Because they actually care about you, right? Versus somebody who doesn't know you, they could see where your messaging and your interpretation is incongruent, but they're not going to say anything because they don't want to upset the apple cart, because you're already in a state of upset.
Yeah.
And I think finding someone who's an agent that you trust is, and sometimes it's better if it's not a professional, right? And if you have this person, and I think it's also good to pick someone who's willing to be honest, but also has the skill and the ability to relate to where you're at and meet you where you are. And that's why my suggestion to be in front of the mirror and ask your soul who's the right person is the fastest way. And look, it may be somebody consciously you may have never picked, but your soul has access to more data and information than your conscious mind could ever hold for 2 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Or for 2,000 years, because the soul is the superconscious, right? It has access to every grain of sand in the universe. Your conscious mind is like a grain of sand. It's limited. It's fast, right? But it's limited in its ability to figure things out. And also, when you're operating from that position, you're informing the other aspects of yourself that, hey, I want to include you in on my growth process, right? If you're going to relate with your subconscious, you got to find a body worker who will get in there and pull out the pain. If you want to work with your unconscious, you got to find somebody who's in the breath work, who will help you move these old, toxic, outdated emotions and feelings so you can catch up and be current. And if you want to work with your conscious mind, and you and I talked about this earlier, you got to find somebody who works with the brain, somebody who, and there's lots of different systems out there. There isn't one system that's the right system. You got to figure out what's right for you and get these people involved and address every aspect of yourself. Address your superconscious, address your subconscious, address your unconscious, address your conscious mind, and keep buffing and sanding and polishing until you have clarity, but mostly until you have integration. And so you can see things for what they are, add nothing, take nothing away, and simply be okay with what is.
Yeah, and I love the way you set that up to end with, and simply be okay with what is, because there's an awful lot of new age thought out there or new age pablum in my estimation. It's just like, it's all good. It's just be okay. It's like, no, no, do the work necessary. Sometimes the work it takes discipline. Let's not tell stories about it being easy or a snap. Let's be truthful about it, because the work is deep. The work is rewarding, and sadly, the work is not for the faint of heart. The work is for those willing to open their heart. Yeah. So so thanks for the setup on that. I'm aware of our time, and I want to make sure we take a few minutes to talk about talk about your work.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to leave that wildly open ended. So share a little bit about
my work.
Your work.
It's evolved, right? And because I'm constantly evolving, and I think, as a listener, when you're choosing someone to work with, I feel it's important to choose someone who is focused on growing themselves. Because that means, let's say you have a relationship with this coach, this body worker, this energy worker, this counselor for 4 or 5 years. 5 years down the road, do you want them taking you to the same place?
Mm-hmm.
No, you don't, because you want to choose someone who's constantly evolving. So in my work, I'm receiving at least 4 or 5 times a week either a coaching session for myself, either some body work, some energy work, some breath work. I have somebody who's focused in on me for 4 or 5 days a week, because I understood very quickly that transformation and integration is where it's at. And if I can be in the presence of someone who's doing that deep work and has been focused like that for a couple decades, I know they're going to be able to get me down the road. And since I dealt with a lot of complex trauma and stress and confusion and anxiety as a child, and was able to transcend all those states and turn them into the exact opposite, when people find me, they know for sure when they sit down in my presence, I'm going to be able to get them where they want to go. And so my work has evolved from having to have very complex solutions for complex problems to simply being with the person, investigating them, getting clear on what the root cause is, dissolving the root cause, and then teaching them how to do the work on themselves. Because I want to empower people. My strategy of, how we say this, of hyper independence always made me allergic to being dependent on someone else, because I viewed that as an issue. But as I grew and I realized I was in an overprotective state,
Mm-hmm.
I needed to get into the receptive mode. And so once you get someone in the receptive mode, everything in their life changes, because now their dreams are actually possible. How can anyone, like Michael Jordan, could never become Michael Jordan without help, right? If there's no Phil Jackson, we're not even talking about Michael Jordan. Okay? If there's no Michael Jordan, we're not talking about Phil Jackson. You need other people to lean against that have a skill, but actually care about themselves, because that care that they have for themselves, that they're expressing every week by being receptive to other teachers, coaches, body workers, and healers, that receptive mode is now being transferred to you. And now they're showing you, like, look, it's not about what we're doing in this hour. It's about what I teach you that you can do every day so that you and I can have an interdependent relationship. So my work before started out probably codependent, dependent, and it's shifted dramatically over the last 22 years into a high state of interdependence and growing and coaching people. But I'm different than a coach in the sense that I mentor. To me, a mentor is someone that stays connected to someone for a decade or more, right? I don't want a coaching client for a year. I want someone that I can impact for a decade. Get all their ducks in a row. Set them up so that their emotional body is working fabulously. Their mental body is working fabulously. If their body's comfortable, their emotions are grounded, their mind is quiet, and their energy is abundant at all times. And now they have a heart mission that they want to move into the world to impact others. So really my focus is on impacting those who have a mission and a purpose to impact others by changing themselves from the inside out.
Beautiful. I was going to ask you who is your, who would be the person that you would work with. And I think you just answered that. Yeah. Well, go ahead. There's more.
I mean, mostly it's entrepreneurs, coaches, teachers, healers, and then people who are suffering, right? That they've tried everything they can in the world, and I'm like their last ditch effort, right? I'm their last shot. And they come in and I help them out. And after that, we build a very powerful relationship together. And that's the most important thing for me. The most important thing is the relationship. They understand that I care. And I'm going to be there for them.
Yeah, beautiful. There is so much, and similar to Act One, there's so much here, Christopher, that I've broken every rule of my timing for an Act Two and run over, and I am delighted.
I'm delighted too. Yeah. So I love your questions. I love your presence. I love your ability to sift through what is looking for expansion, for more depth, and to, intuitively curate, right? Instinctually, where the conversation wants to go and make it more impactful for the listener. Yeah, you're very good at what you do, and it's been a great pleasure being in your presence.
Yeah, thank you so much. And before we thank you for all of that, much appreciated. And what do you want to say to wrap this? Maybe say to the listeners, we're going to have your contact information, of course, your website, all that in the notes for both episodes, Acts 1 and 2. But what do you want to say to close us out here?
Here's what I want to say. After you leave the mirror, go to truebodyintelligence.com and order the audio version of my book. There's 2 versions. There's version 1, which is the book. And then there's version 2, which has these attunements in between each chapter that will already start to put you in a more receptive mode. Without information, how can you make a positively informed choice? And the information that I give you, there's no substitute. Okay? You can meditate till you're blue in the face. You can go to breathing classes until you're blue in your toes. There's no substitute for the information that I give you. And once you understand that the unresolved lifetime accumulated stress that's generational is the one thing that's keeping you from having a quiet mind, from having restorative sleep, from having abundant amounts of energy, from having a comfortable body, from having a clear mind, you'll do every single thing that you can to get there. But without knowing, how do you know what to do without the information? So go there, listen to the book. I promise you, and listen to it 3 times. It's going to be a game changer for you.
Beautiful. Thank you for that, Christopher. A delight. Again, thanks so much for joining me here, joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining me, Ken Mossman, your host here on Mojo for the Modern Man, and my guest, Christopher Maher. You can have a look at Christopher's good work by clicking the links in the intro notes for today's show. Check out True Body Intelligence, check out Christopher's book, his website, and see what he's got going on, and reach out to him. A spectacular guest, obviously, and with an awful lot to offer, and do check out what he's got going on and reach out to the man. Of course, we will be back next week on Mojo for the Modern Man with another fantastic episode. And a quick reminder and invitation to come by my website, kenmossman.com. Have a look at the I Am pages, information about my men's course, my flagship men's course. There are 2 cohorts launching in September of 2023. There will be a morning weekday cohort, and there will be an evening weekday cohort as well to cover a wide swath of time zones, and love to have you there. If you have any questions, of course, reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions and to have a short call with you to do that. It doesn't have to just be email. Quick shout out of thanks and gratitude to Carly Farrar and Megan Johnson at Knack & Company. Megan is my virtual assistant and works wonders keeping me going in a good straight line. And Carly, of course, writes the copy that you read in the intro notes for every show. Josh Hines is the sound producer and guitarist extraordinaire here on Mojo for the Modern Man, so thanks to Josh as well. Couldn't do it without my production team. Be well, take care, and we'll see you back here soon on Mojo for the Modern Man.